Hello, and welcome to my program on common sedges of Wisconsin lakes and rivers. I'm Paul Rothrock, the Associate Curator Emeritus at the Indiana University Herbarium here in Bloomington. Way back in 1970, I naively began what turned into a lifelong journey with sedges. My first experience was to study the ecology of a little sedge species that tolerates acidic waters flowing out of Pennsylvania coal mines. Then I developed the treatment for sedges as part of the flora of Pennsylvania. So at this point, 50 years later, sedges have become my friends and to some extent, family. I feel somewhat like the proud parent that has the opportunity to pull out the photo album and slowly share with you pictures from every birthday, every holiday, plus graduation and other school pictures. But trust me, I have sought to keep this presentation to the high points. And even if your only takeaway is, gee, there are a lot of beautiful plants that I had no idea existed, that will be sufficient. So let me open the family album and begin with a basic introduction to what is a sedge. Here we have pictures of three sedge-like plants. One is actually a grass, one is a sedge, and one is a true rush. Can you guess which is which? Well, here are the answers. The sedge is the one on the left, the grass in the middle, and the true rush is on the far right. In the jargon, all of these might be referred to as graminoids. That is, they are grass or grass-like. Although they belong to three distinct families of plants, they share several obvious traits. They're all monocots with linear leaves. They are wind-pollinated plants, and so their flowers are small, and they produce abundant dry pollen. But at the same time, the details are different. They have different kinds of vegetation, different form of flower and flower clusters, and the fruits differ too. Let's take a closer look at how sedges and grasses differ, starting with the stems. The stems of sedges tend to be triangular in cross-section. So yep, sedges have edges. In contrast, grasses usually have round or flattened stems, and they tend to be hollow inside. Think bamboo. Because the sedge stem has three faces, the leaf blades are often arrayed in three rows, as nicely demonstrated by both of these photographs looking down from the top or somewhat laterally along this plant's stem. In contrast, the leaves in grasses are arranged in two rows, such as in the foul manna grass, or perhaps are arranged in a spiral around the stem. The leaves themselves differ between sedges and grasses. Although both have long linear blades and a sheath that wraps around the stem, the sheaths may differ. Those in grasses come with a split built into one side. And in contrast, the sedge sheaths are tubular, though they may have a translucent zone on one side. Moving up the plant to the inflorescence, we continue to see differences. In grasses, each of the tiny flowers is associated with a pair of scales. And often these flowers have lodicules that can push the scales apart when the flower is mature. In turn, these tiny florets are arranged in clusters called spikelets. And at the base of any one spikelet, you will find a pair of scales that lack florets. Grass folks have dubbed these scales glooms. I suppose because they're gloomy. They are not part of the reproductive action of the plant. Here is a generalized sedge flower. Note that it has just one scale, no lidicule, but perhaps the flower has bristles attached to its base. And then finally, notice that the fruits are different. Sedges have what are called achene fruits, basically a miniature sunflower kernel, which contrasts with the grain fruit that we find in grasses. The state of Wisconsin has a high diversity of both sedges and grasses. There are over 220 grass species, which is huge, but not as big as several neighboring states. And as for sedges, Wisconsin has 230 sedge species. So together, grasses and sedges represent about 20% of Wisconsin's flora. They also include many species that are rare, threatened, or endangered in Wisconsin. Thus, your nature preserve professionals need to get to know these families in order to effectively do their job of maintaining a healthy ecosystem. And what kinds of habitats contain sedges? People generally think of sedges as plants of wetland habitats. And indeed, here are four examples. And many sedges survive or thrive in specific kinds of wetland communities. But sedges also may be found in drier habitats, including sugar maple woods, oak savannas, and even the margins of sand dunes near Lake Michigan. But these drier habitats would be a topic for another day. Wisconsin is home to 16 genera, or what I shall call clans within the sedge family. So in order to wrap our arms around my large family, let's do a dive into just a dozen sedge clans and kinship groups. These clans in Wisconsin include the leafy bulrushes, stem bulrushes, spike rushes, umbrella sedges, and three-way sedge, as well as the genus Carex, the true sedges. A side note on the use of the word rushes. There are true rushes in a separate family, short-tailed relatives of sedges. So as used here, rushes is a generalized term for grass-like plants in wet habitat, and many are actually sedges. Most of the species in the family are in the genus Carex. My intention is to introduce you to 7 kinship groups within this very large genus. If you want to pursue more depth, I recommend my 2 volumes entitled Sedges of Indiana. The geographical coverage is broad enough to encompass Wisconsin nicely. The first volume handles 88 species, the non-Carex species, while the second volume is on the genus Carex and covers 158 species. Okay, let's delve into the non-Carex sedges, and let's start with the leafy bulrushes. These are rather husky plants, often reaching over 3 feet tall. In fact, waist high would be an average height for wetland sedges in general. And among the species covered in this program, one can grow to 5 feet. But at the other end of the spectrum, there's another species we will show you that only grows to about 4 inches tall. The inflorescences of the leafy bulrushes are highly branched and often are broken into some that are long rays with then dense clusters of spikelets. In the leafy bulrushes, the fruits are rather seed-like in size. This particular species does have those bristles attached to the base of the fruit. Bullgrass is another common leafy bulrush. This one reaches 5 feet in height and has a very gracefully arching inflorescence. As the fruits mature, one sees the long, wiry bristles that do confer a wool-like appearance to the inflorescence. Both of our leafy bulrushes form expansive colonies in habitats that alternate from seasonally flooded to drier for part of the summer. The second clan of sedges I dubbed the naked-stemmed bulrushes. For Wisconsin lakeshores, the most significant species is chairmaker's bulrush. This species does have leaves, but the blades are rather short and inconspicuous, so that most photosynthesis is done by the green stems. In chairmaker's bulrush, clusters of spikelets are found on the side of the stems. By the way, as the common name implies, this species is a source for material used in making basketry, cane furniture, and the like. As already mentioned, chairmaker's bulrush thrives on lake margins. It can form extensive networks of rope-like rhizomes that make it tolerant of wave action as it holds down otherwise unstable substrates. Soft-stem bulrush is another common species. It too has tough rhizomes. Clearly, though, it has a highly branched inflorescence. As its name implies, the stems are squeezably soft, akin to a famous brand of toilet paper, and thus this species is not used in caning. The third clan in our sedge family is a most peculiar one indeed, perhaps the runt of the family. The spike rushes have taken the reduction of plant parts to an extreme. As you might tell from this colony of spike rush along this lake margin, there are no leaf blades at all. Furthermore, the inflorescence is merely a single spike at the tip of the stem. The species you are most likely to run into in Wisconsin is diminutive in size, growing to only a few inches tall. Needle spike rush can grow underwater in the early summer, but by late summer, as water levels recede, it looks like a lumpy lawn. This is a marvelous trick because the spike rushes are the magicians of the family. Stems that grow out of the water can use carbon dioxide gas from the atmosphere in photosynthesis, just the way that most other plants do. But when they grow underwater, they magically pull carbonate from the surrounding liquid. As a result, the colony can grow luxuriantly underwater. You might have seen this particular plant, in fact, in tropical fish tanks. Given the adaptability of needle spike rush to a variety of habitats, it is no surprise that it's a widespread species in North America. And it's also found in Eurasia, as well as even into South America. On to clan number 4, which is the umbrella sedges. One impressive species in this group is papyrus, with fame in the development of one of the world's great religions. In the Midwest, though, this clan can be rather weedy. One of the species, yellow nut sedge, is particularly disliked by the farm community. However, our common Wisconsin species, the long-scaled nut sedge, is more polite. It grows to about 18 inches tall and can tolerate disturbed habitats without being a nuisance. Over time, these plants form clumps. The base of each stem produces a distinctive swollen corm, and these corms may form offsets in the same manner as onions and daffodil bulbs. A final clan to mention before we get to the big one is three-way sedge. This clan has only one species. Though common in Wisconsin, For some reason, it becomes less abundant as you go west from here, and it is totally unknown in the flora of the Dakotas. And yet, it does occur in the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevada Mountains in the western parts of the US. Three-way sedge thrives in shallow water, but one where the organic content of the soil is high. It stands about 2 feet tall and has numerous leaves that beautifully illustrate the three-ranked leaf arrangement found in the sedge family. This particular species is easy to recognize. No other sedge has these numerous clusters of flowers at the many nodes of the stem. If you have had a family reunion, I am sure there are times that you get overwhelmed with all the unfamiliar faces. And trying to keep the familial relationships straight is a nightmare. I never could figure out cousins once removed and second cousins. But all the remaining sedges belong to one clan, the genus Carex, and it is a prolific genus. So I have divided the clan into 7 kinship groups for our consideration. First off, though, we need to think about what traits do members of the Carex clan all share in common. Well, first, all bear separate male versus female flowers, unisexual flowers. Most of the sedge family has bisexual flowers. The second trait is the presence of perigynia. The perigynium can be described as a wrapper that encases the small fruits found in the sedge family. These wrappers have evolved through the fusion of pairs of scales found within the inflorescence. Once that fusion took place, it allowed for an amazing amount of modification. Some perigynia are large, an inch or more in length. Some are small, only 1/8 of an inch in length. But more than size, the perigynial wall can vary in texture, from papery to thick. The shape from bladder-like to football-shaped, to tightly enwrapping the enclosed fruit or being loose and bladder-like. The perigynia can even be flat and even have a wing. Many taper to a beak, and in some cases, the beak can exhibit prominent teeth at the apex. Since perigynia come in so many shapes and sizes, they are critical in recognizing individual species. One should focus, therefore, on learning sedges during the first half of the summer, when the perigynia are easiest to spot. But don't be alarmed if your eyes begin to play tricks on you. Let's open the Carex photo album and begin with the bottlebrush sedges. These species, such as porcupine sedge, have separate male and female spikes. The female spikes have many perigynia in a cylindrical arrangement, and thus they do look like a coarse bottlebrush. Porcupine sedge in particular thrives in moist soils that have some lime content. A second bottlebrush species is bristly sedge. It likes it wetter. Here it is growing in several inches of persistent water next to pickerel weed. Again, the male and female spikes are separate. But as one looks more closely at the female spike, you discover that they are bristly. Each of the perigynia has a pair of spreading teeth. These allow an animal to easily carry the perigynia from one lake to another. The porcupine and bristly bottlebrush sedges form clumps. But in contrast, the third species, yellow bottlebrush sedges, produces elongated rhizomes. So over time, they can form an extensive mat-like clone. A quick look, though, at the mature female spikes demonstrates the source of the common name, since they attain a beautiful golden yellow hue. The second kinship group within Carex is nicknamed the lake sedges. These still have the bottle brush shape to the female spikes, but tend to have multiple male spikes. And the perigynia have thicker, non-papery walls. All of these species, including the common lake sedge, may spread by rhizomes. Among the lake sedges are several species with hairy perigynia, a trait not often seen in the genus. So watch for the prairie woolly sedge and the bog woolly sedge along lake shores. The major difference between these two species is in the form of the leaf blades. They are narrower and rolled like a cinnamon stick in the bog woolly sedge. As their name implies, the two species thrive under different soil chemistries. The prairie woolly sedge occupies habitats with more mineral-rich soils than does the bog woolly sedge. One of my favorite Carex groups is the hop sedges. Perhaps the common hop sedge provides insight into the group name. The perigynia form dense, somewhat broadly cylindrical clusters that are vaguely reminiscent of the hops plant. Unfortunately, Carex does not have flavors that enhance your favorite adult beverages. But in passing, I should mention that there are fermented beverages made from tubers found in some species in the family at large. Not all species in the hop sedge group have cylindrical female spikes. Several, such as the shining burr sedge, are more mace-like. But all members of the group have remarkably large perigynia, where these range from 1/2 inch to 1 inch in length. One curious ecological observation about all of the hop sedges is their geographical distribution. If you draw a line from just west of Wisconsin straight south to the Gulf of Mexico, that marks about as far west as all of these species will go. The lens-fruited sedges are the fourth Carex kinship group in our photo album. The tussock sedges are quite interesting ecologically. Over time, they form stools or mounds of vegetation. Walking through this habitat is somewhat akin to walking while inebriated. You may find yourself continuously stumbling as you run into these bumpy stools. But let's ask the question, why does the plant form tussocks? Well, actually, the growth form is encouraged by ant species that build their nests within the clumps of stems. In fact, there may be one species of ant nesting near the base of the clump, while a different species prefers the penthouse position. These lens-fruited sedges may be the dominant species in meadows and fens near Wisconsin rivers. The name lens fruit, by the way, comes from the shape of the achene fruit inside the tightly fitting perigynia, which are densely packed into the female spike. This group includes the most handsome of sedge species, the fringed sedge. The name comes from the appearance of the female spikes. The scales have awns that project well beyond the tips of the perigynia. If you are planting a rain garden or interested in trying sedges as an ornamental in your landscape, the fringed sedge is definitely one you should consider. I should point out that my book on the genus Carex includes a list of over 24 species that ought to be used in landscaping. Well, perhaps to this point, you have noticed that all of the Carex kinship groups had basically separate male and female spikes. And the female spikes are supported by visible stalks. This arrangement is apparent in the species imaged on the left. You might liken their arrangement to the way college dormitories were set up when I was of that age. There were clear men's versus women's dorms. The last three groups of Carex, though, move us into the modern era, where dorms are of a mixed gender. So, in this example, on the right, the male flowers are born at the tip of each branch. Can you spot them? They're really rather hidden. Let's check out the fox sedges. And the first thing we notice is that the inflorescence is a mass of perigynia. But each branch does have a small cluster of male flowers hidden at its apex. To be sure, spotting of them takes close inspection. So maybe simply note the lack of a separate male spike. The common fox sedge has a fun trait. The stalk supporting the inflorescence is rather broad. And inside it has a spongy tissue, so that when you squeeze the stalk between your thumb and finger, it gives and compresses like a dried sponge. Outside of this particular group, the inflorescence stalks of all sedges are rather fibrous and hard. Much of the emphasis in identifying different Carex species has focused on the inflorescence, but vegetative traits may also be important. In the common fox sedge, the leaf sheath area has a prominent band of translucent tissue on one face. Other species may lack this band, or may have one that is colored or spotted, or may have one that is smooth rather than cross-wrinkled. Moving on to our penultimate Carex group is called the multi-flowered fox sedges. Once again, the inflorescences have a vague box-like aspect due to the numerous densely arranged perigynia. But in the brown fox sedge, the individual perigynia are rather tiny, about 2 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch in long, and they have a prominent beak. Once again, notice the sheath traits. It has obviously this translucent band, but in this case, the cross-wrinkling is quite coarse, and it's accompanied by these faint reddish dots. The fox sedges and the multi-flowered fox sedges are among 10 species that are frequently sown in mitigation or constructed wetlands. They are easy to grow, and they have an abundant seed crop, and they quickly provide ecologically important structure and food base to our human-made wetlands. Well, not a moment too soon, we have arrived at the last group of Carex relatives, the oval sedges. Those of you who love birds and the hobby of bird watching are familiar with the problem of warbler identification. The species are numerous, with many variations in color and song. They are especially problematic to identify as one enters the fall season. The oval sedges qualify as the warblers of the sedge family. In other words, like warblers, it's easy to recognize the group. It's challenging to recognize the species. The unique trait among the oval sedges is that the perigynia possess a thin, slightly translucent wing that runs along the body and the beak. The several oval sedges you are most likely to run into around Wisconsin lakes and rivers include the broom oval sedges, crested oval sedge, and Bebb's oval sedge. Perhaps you were able to spot the differences in the shape and coloration of the perigynia, and maybe the more obvious differences in the shape of the inflorescence. For example, the crested oval sedge is noteworthy for the globe shape to these lateral branches. Well, You have survived my family reunion and the tour of the photo album, but if the diversity of forms and bits of unique biology proved fascinating, let me end by recommending 3 resources in addition to my books. The first is free and on the web. Simply Google Sedge Guide and look for the Color Guide to Carex in the Chicago region. You can download the guide and laminate the pages. Most of the species covered today are in this guide, and each species has several diagnostic photos and a short blurb describing its traits and habitat. The second recommendation is a book by my friend and colleague, Andrew Hipp, who is at Morton Arboretum. His field guide to Wisconsin sedges is excellent and includes charming watercolor images done by his wife, Rachel Davis. And third and finally, a rather new publication entitled Sedges and Rushes of Minnesota by Welby R. Smith. It has wonderful photographs, good descriptions of the plant and their habitats. And with that, thanks for allowing me to be part of your day. And so now, get out there and enjoy the rivers and wetlands of Wisconsin with their beautiful sedges.